Hi, welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. It is Monday, March 10th, and I'm Jessica Steinberg. I'm speaking today with tech editor Sharon Wrobel and health editor and reporter Diana Bletter. Hi, good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Hi there. It is day 521 of the war. As Israeli negotiators head to Qatar for the latest hostage deal and ceasefire talks, U.S. Trump envoy Adam Boehler appeared in several Israeli interviews last night, defending his direct talks with Hamas and commenting that the U.S. is not, quote, an agent of Israel, unquote. Meanwhile, the U.S.-Hamas talks appear to be focused on the last living American hostage, Idan Alexander, the American-born and raised lone soldier with Israeli parents and lots of family here in Israel. We'll look at some other headlines this morning, including the latest figures from Israel's two largest banks, the causes of Gaza civilians who have been killed in the crossfire in the ongoing war in Gaza, as well as the third Israeli airline to offer nonstop flights between Tel Aviv and New York, and Israelis turning to cruises as flight prices have gone up. And finally, Diana's trip into Al-Aramshe, the only non-Jewish community that was evacuated in Israel for the 16 months of the war. We'll talk about all of that in just a moment. Okay, Sharon, let's start with Bank Hapoalim and Discount Bank, Israel's two largest banks, posted massive financial gains, which felt shocking given that this is a nation that has really been mired in war for the last 15, 16 months, and economic hardship, of course, across the board. And as you looked at those returns, what were you finding? What are the reasons for such financial gains, and what's the reaction to it, of course, given the fact that this is a country that is dealing with financial hardships at the moment?
As you mentioned, on the one hand, we had the record profits. Even in Bank Leumi, it's the biggest profit ever during wartime. And one of the reasons is that we live in a high interest rate environment. So how do the banks make their money? They charge interest on your loan, on your mortgage, on overdraft, and those loans and sort of the debt that people have been running into has grown over the war period as the economy's been battered. So in a way, we can say that the banks have been profiting from this war situation on the one hand. And then if you look at the customers, who are the customers, it's really Israelis who've gone out into the war, are on reserve duty, defending the country. Half of the country, thousands of people have been evacuated. What does it mean? They've been preoccupied with not being in their normal life and not also being able to deal with their finances. So a lot of, they haven't been looking at, probably also not been in the right mindset.
Right, not looking at their bank statements, I imagine. Right, not keeping track of it.
Right. So we have the banks who charge sort of high interest rates. But even if you had some savings, you have to really argue with the bank today to give you a high interest. And it's also due to that there's a lack of competition among the banks. There's two large banks and three smaller banks, and there's just not enough competition. And so they can just continue like that.
What's the backlash been since the profits were posted?
So, this is, as we said, the record profits is something that the banks from year to year, so this year it was even more. So there is a big backlash from the public. I think there's a mistrust in the banking system. People don't feel that the bank is sort of, there for them, to help them to bring their finances into order. There has been now also, there's since the Bank of Israel, there isn't much. They have been trying to get more banks to enter the market, but it's, there are sort of various barriers. And there's various ministers like Moshe Gafni who've been proposing legislation that would kind of push the banks to have accountability to a sense, right? We live in a free market, economy, so we don't want legislation or regulation, but since we're not seeing that the banks are improving their services and they are there for their customers to also offer them the benefit of higher interest, that something's got to give, right, from somewhere. And we haven't seen that. So there is a lot of political pressure at the moment. And that's why we also saw the Bank of Israel recommending to the banks now that they should put aside something like 1.5 billion shekels a year to help customers, to give them to ease their conditions. There's also a sense that there's not enough financial education among the Israeli public. There's more than 200 billion shekels that's sitting in checking accounts, meaning they're not in savings. They're not bearing any interest. But at the same time, the banks can get interest on that through the Bank of Israel, and it's basically cheap financing for them, and that's also part of their profits. So it is. I did want to mention that it is also about customers who have to also should be looking after, some, if they have funds in their accounts, that they can go and put them into savings accounts. But as we know in Israel, we don't know what's going to be tomorrow. I think there's a sense among many Israelis of the urgency of needing their money, or not trusting the bank that they would offer them the best product or the best service.
The point that you make, of course, when you're on reserve duty for months, or your spouse is, what are the things that get neglected? Your bank account and your health. Things that people just don't pay attention to, and they don't have the mindset or the mind space to deal with it. Okay, thanks, Sharon. We're going to switch gears and move over to Diana, who we recently had a piece. We have a piece on the site right now that has been, I believe, Diana, it's taken you quite a few weeks to really do the research and dig into this. You basically decided to take a look at this issue of Gazan civilians, of course, were killed and displaced by the deadly crossfire of the ongoing war in Gaza. And Israel, of course, always generally universally blamed as the aggressor. But there's also been very little evidence about this, especially when it would come to specific kinds of injuries, specific kinds of situations. And sometimes when there was a deeper look taken, it was found that Hamas or other Gazan terror groups were actually the ones to blame. Now, what really brought this to the fore was that there were high-profile articles, platforms in April 2024, and again in October, this past October, in The Guardian, the England's Guardian, and in the New York Times, that laid out the accusations, and they were written by doctors. Even though there was, again, only secondhand knowledge of what had taken place and what were the circumstances of these shootings, there was also very incomplete forensic evidence. So what you did was dive into this a little bit and just try and figure out what you could, which of course was going to be only in certain corners in a sense. And what I really want to ask you about is, how did you go about this research when you're looking at something where there's very little forensic evidence and no one's been able to go into Gaza? How did you go about your research for this piece?
I spoke to a lot of experts. I spoke to an international warfare expert, John Spencer, who had gone 4 times into Gaza with Israeli forces. And I think it's very hard for people in the West to understand terror groups' mentality, because in the West, we believe in protecting our children, but terror groups believe in sacrifice and martyrdom for their goal, and terror groups operate with terror, whether they're operating against Israeli civilians, the hostages, for example, and what they did on October 7th, or what they do to their own people to advance their goals. And I think that's something that, for me, was very important to see. They have a history of using children as soldiers and to build tunnels and to carry explosives. And we really don't know what is happening in Gaza. Only Hamas approved journalists can get in there. So we have very limited information.
Right. Something obviously that you point out in the article, and that, of course, was written about in The Guardian and the New York Times, was pointing toward the, again, circumstantial evidence of children with gunshot wounds. And that's what really brought you to the fore in writing this, because you are our health editor, and you were sort of taking a very roundabout way of looking at it, again, because it's so hard to get that information. Tell us a little bit about what John Spencer, what he was laying out for you as you were trying to sort of dig into this and figure it out.
Well, he said that his aha moment came on January 30th when he was looking at the hostages being released in Gaza, and he saw that the Hamas terrorists were carrying the same rifles that the Israeli army uses, with the same bullets, whether they were stolen from the Israeli army or not, but it's the same weapons. And diving further, I saw that there were cases when Hamas, for example, when they were given humanitarian aid, they shot a child who was going there to get food. The Hamas operatives steal the food and then sell it on their own, as well as Hamas terrorists shooting people trying to escape the evacuated zone. They don't wear uniforms, and things happen so quickly. We really have no idea what's happening there or who is shooting the children. Spencer believes that, as crazy as it's and cynical as it seems, it could be Hamas is shooting their own children to up the casualty figures.
As you were digging into this and trying to write this piece and research it, you made your way to analysts, like this John Spencer, who are not necessarily usually in your, Rolodex, so to speak, in your contacts. These are not the usual people that you're speaking to. So I'm curious how you made the decision to go to him, for instance. How did you find him as a source, as a way of analyzing this whole situation?
Well, I can't research what the doctors saw or didn't see because I wasn't there. So that was their interpretation of the events. And they also claim that they never saw any terror operatives in the hospital when it's proven that there were terror operatives operating in hospitals. But I went to military experts because I was curious, what is it like to fight in a crowded zone where the civilians are unable to leave, and Hamas deliberately embeds themselves in civilian areas, schools, United Nations facilities, hospitals. What is that like? What does it mean? It means that Israel will be blamed, and that's Hamas's goal. That, as Spencer said, the more civilians who are killed, the better it is for Hamas, because then the world opinion turns against Israel.
Okay. Thanks for that, Diana. Well, of course, we'll link to the article at the end of this podcast, so be sure to have a look at it and to read it. We're going to take a quick break. When we're back, we will switch gears again and talk about Israeli airlines, cruises, and a Bedouin village in the north that is finally going back home. So stay with us. Sharon, as we said, switching gears, you reported that Israir, really, known for flying to Eilat and to Greece and to a couple of other European destinations, is now gearing up to become the third Israeli airline to offer nonstop flights between Tel Aviv and New York. Really, the idea here is bringing more competition, and its local rival, Arkia, also debuted flights to New York last month. And of course, we've all been stuck flying El Al for all of these months. So you had reported about this possibility a few months ago, but now that it's here, tell us what you think about it. Is it actually going to be able to break, the monopoly that flagship El Al has had over us?
Right. So, I mean, Israir is now applying for this sort of being a foreign carrier and being able to fly to the US. And that's after Arkia, which is sort of the rival, it's also a smaller Israeli airline, has started the route, and they even said they started the route last month. They've already decided to extend it. They were supposed to do it for 3 months, and now they said they'll extend the route to New York until the end of October because they're seeing huge demand. They have been able to fill the planes. It's a different service. It's not El Al. It's an all economy service. So you won't necessarily see business people taking this option. But again, as you said, specifically US airlines really haven't been here for the past year. It's been, apart from being very, very expensive to buy a ticket to New York, there are no seats. There are also, now that we see a bit more calm in this country, we may also see more people coming into the country, hopefully. And this is what Israir and Arkia are hoping, that, people will be able, leisure and families will be able to buy tickets. I mean, there's already a difference now between Arkia and El Al of like $400, $500 per person.
That's significant.
Right. I mean, tickets are still more expensive than they were before the war, but this is also a global development. But there's still room for them to go down. So if you're really going to see Israir coming in, travel experts believe that will help to bring down some of the prices. What they see as a challenge is that once, hopefully, we will have a peace and tourists will come back here, Arkia and Israel will have to do more in their marketing to actually make their name in the US or elsewhere, because people are not necessarily going to know and book with Israir or Arkia because they don't actually know the airline. So that in order for them to fill up the planes and for this route to continue in the longer term, they'll have to fill it from both sides.
You had a piece about Israelis looking desperate to get out of here for a little bit, and this increase in cruise bookings. So is that a real thing? We're really seeing Israelis taking more cruises from Haifa?
Haifa is not a port anymore that we have the big cruises taking off from that port. But people have, Israelis, there's been, because of the travel limitations, because there are no seats on flights and high prices, it has led to a shift in how Israelis book their holidays. So if before they would book maybe a month or 2 or maybe 3 months in advance, now, because of this situation, a lot of Israelis have been booking 6 months, 8 months, even in advance. And that sort of goes a lot into the category of cruises, because also on cruises you have to book at least, let's say, 6 months or 9 or even a year in advance to get availability or prices that you can afford. And there's also, so that's one side of it that has attracted Israelis. And then it gives you a package that you can also book the flight with. There's more reliability. And unfortunately, the war has also led to a wave of sort of anti-Israel sentiment. We've seen the attacks in Amsterdam targeting Israelis. Right. And so Israelis think twice where to go with their children running around on the streets. I think there's more awareness of where to go and how to do your holidays. On cruises, you can decide to stay on the cruise when you dock in a city. And there's a lot of entertainment for the family, for everyone. You don't have to worry about where to eat, where to find food, where to find entertainment or attractions. It's all there. And on the biggest cruise today in the world's biggest cruises, the security staff are mainly Israelis. And I think that gives a lot of confidence to Israelis. Also, you don't have to worry about all of the things that I just mentioned. They'll all be carried for you. And also, as we mentioned, most Israelis haven't gone on holidays as much as before. So they are also prepared that extra cost because cruises are expensive, even if you book them ahead. And there's a sense of, that after such a long time, after almost 1.5 years of suffering, of pain, that Israelis feel that they deserve to have an experience, not just a holiday, a break, and an experience more than even just a holiday that you probably don't have the energy even to get into the logistics of organizing.
Diana, finishing up with you and your forays into various northern towns and villages. You went to Al-Aramshe, which is the only non-Jewish community that was evacuated. Remember, there have been tens of thousands, 60,000 who were evacuated and uprooted from the Western Galilee, and they returned home, and school started yesterday on Sunday. Tell us what it's like specifically for them, again, being the only non-Jewish community of these 60,000 residents of the north who were evacuated and are now finally heading back home.
This was the Bedouin village right on the northern border with Lebanon. It's a beautiful place, and the mayor drove me around. We went to see the community center that was bombed in a Hezbollah attack last year. But the mayor stopped. He took out of the trunk of his car a bag of cat food to feed a stray cat, which was very sweet to see. He said there are a lot more stray cats and dogs since the war. And he even pointed out to donkeys that had wandered in from Lebanon and cows that were grazing and that got in through the fence openings.
The fence.
Yes, but he said that it was very hard for the Bedouin villagers. They're very tied to their land and their animals. So for them to be evacuated to hotels, he was actually staying in the village where I live during evacuation for part of the time. And they had a very difficult time. And some of them went back even before the ceasefire to be with their animals and their land.
And their thoughts about the war, about Hezbollah, about all of it?
Yes. Well, what he pointed out, which was very sad to hear, was that in the south with Hamas on October 7th, Hamas killed Bedouins there and
took them hostage.
Yes, and took them hostage. And he said that the same thing could happen in the north with Hezbollah. And it made him feel very differently. And even when we stood and looked out into Lebanon, he doesn't feel the same sense of safety that he felt in the past.
Thank you both for being with me on today's Daily Briefing, for highlighting what you've been writing about, for sharing it with the rest of us. We appreciate your words and thoughts.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. We'll be back again tomorrow with another installment. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. Until next time, be well, have yourselves a good week.